In this very in-depth forecast, the majority of Texas and Louisiana are currently being monitored for the potential of severe weather and significant widespread flash flooding. Widespread clusters storms could harbor the main risks of widespread damaging wind gusts upwards of 50 miles per hour, large hail that could be significant in some regions, and the additional risk of a couple of tornadoes is possible. Widespread and significant flash flooding is expected, with rainfall totals reaching upwards of 5 to 6 inches. Everything you need to know on Project Gladiator. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Project Gladiator in-depth weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for May 16th of 2024. For today, we do have an enhanced risk for eastern Texas, including the Houston metro region into western Louisiana, with a slight risk that extends all the way into central Texas and extreme southeastern New Mexico. This will be the primary thing that we are going to be covering in today's forecast. We do have a couple additional marginal risks, one for Wisconsin into northern Illinois that we will not be covering, one for southern Illinois into southern Missouri, northern Arkansas, western Kentucky, and northwestern Tennessee that we will not be covering, as well as a marginal risk for the southern Florida peninsula, including the downtown or the metro regions for Fort Lauderdale and Miami that we will also not be covering. For our risks for today, we do have a 5% tornado risk surrounding the enhanced risk region, including the Houston metro region, where we could see the potential of a couple of tornadoes, as well as a 2% tornado risk for southern Illinois, Missouri, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Kentucky, where we could see the potential of an isolated brief tornado, as well as a 30% damaging wind risk for the enhanced risk region, with an additional 15% further off into western Texas and southeastern New Mexico. This 30% damaging wind risk will be the primary driving risk for the enhanced risk region and the primary risk for severe thunderstorms. We also do have a couple 5% damaging wind risks, where we could see the potential of some isolated damaging wind gusts for all of the marginal risks. We also do have a 15% hail risk, where we could see the potential of some scattered large hail, including the possibility of some large hail that could be significant, exceeding 2 inches in the hatched region for central Texas, further back into western Texas. That doesn't necessarily really include the enhanced risk region, but we could definitely see the potential of some scattered massive hailstones with some of the storms further off to the west. But we also could see the potential of some isolated large hail for all of the marginal risks. For our day 2 outlook, we do have a slight risk that extends from western Georgia, the Florida Panhandle, southern Alabama, southern Mississippi, Louisiana, and the Texas coastline, with an additional marginal risk for North Dakota, Minnesota, South Dakota, southeastern Montana, and northeastern Wyoming. Risks for tomorrow do include a 5% tornado risk for southern Alabama, Georgia, Florida, southern Mississippi, and Louisiana, where we could see the potential of a couple of tornadoes, a 15% damaging wind risk for the slight risk region, where we could see the potential of some scattered damaging wind risk, as well as the potential of some isolated damaging winds for the marginal risk in the north. And then we also do have a 15% hail risk, with the possibility of some significant hailstones exceeding 2 inches for the slight risk region, as well as the potential of some isolated large hail for the north there. For our day 3 outlook, we do have a marginal risk for the eastern seaboard that extends from North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, southern Mississippi, and Louisiana, and northern Florida, where we could see the potential of some isolated severe thunderstorms upcoming, as well as a day 4, 15% for central Nebraska and central Kansas, where we could be watching for the potential of some upcoming significant severe thunderstorms. Taking a look at our excessive rainfall forecast, for today we do have a high risk for excessive rainfall for eastern Texas into western Louisiana, where we are expected to see the potential of some widespread and definitely significant flash flooding for the high risk region, where we will have at least a 70% chance of flash flooding for that high-risk region. We also do have an additional slight risk for southern Missouri, southern Illinois, western Kentucky, western Tennessee, and northern Arkansas, where we could see the potential of some scattered flash flooding. But we will definitely see the potential of some widespread and definitely significant flash flooding for eastern Texas and western Louisiana, and that's definitely one of the primary risks that will be brought with our severe thunderstorms for today. If you do live in the affected region, especially in a low-lying area that may be near a creek or any running water, please stay weather alert for the time being and know what to do if water does start to rise. For our day 2 outlook, we do have a moderate risk for Alabama into southern Missouri, into portions of Louisiana to the north of the the New Orleans metro region, where we could see the potential of some widespread and potentially significant flash flooding for the moderate risk region. And then for our day 3 outlook, we do have a slight risk for Alabama, Georgia, and the Florida Panhandle, where we could see the potential of some scattered flash flooding. Taking a look at our weather model, starting off with our 500 millibars in our upper air pattern and our surface observations and how those are going to work in conjunction to indicate the risk for severe thunderstorms for today. Starting off with our surface observations, we do have a surface low that is situated back into extreme southeastern New Mexico and western Texas there, with a little bit of a dry line slash warm front or stationary front that is positioned across central Texas into eastern Texas and Louisiana, and that will trigger our severe thunderstorms across central Texas into eastern Texas. We also do have a little bit of a dry line that is set up across western Texas that may be able to fire off some additional severe thunderstorms, as well as a stationary front that was a cold front that has stalled that could also fire off the potential of some additional severe thunderstorms. But the primary fueling factor, the primary triggering factor, initiating boundary, will be this stationary front, a pseudo warm front from warm air vection that's going to be pushing out of the south and advancing moisture, and that will trigger our severe thunderstorms. As far as our upper air pattern goes, we do have a pretty powerful trough that is advecting into this region with a upper air trough that is situated across New Mexico with a subtropical jet that is advecting into this region that will support our severe thunderstorms for today. And with the orientation to our dry line slash stationary front here, we will definitely see a little bit more of a messy to linear mode, with it being a little bit more perpendicular to that initiating boundary, where we will see a lot of messy convection, messy storms across this region. But we could see the potential of maybe some more discrete development to semi-discrete development further off to the west, as along that dry line, we could see the potential of a little bit more perpendicular shear vectors that may support a little bit more discrete development. However, it will definitely turn into more of a linear system as storms progress, but we will definitely see quite a lot of speed shear come out of this, with a pretty powerful 500 millibar jet with 500 millibar flow upwards of the upper 50 to potentially even 60 miles per hour across this region. That will definitely support very large amounts of speed shear across this region and the potential for some large hail. Taking a look at our low-level jet and how that is expected to affect our directional shear and our potential for tornadoes across this region, we do have a pretty decently strong low-level jet that is currently ongoing that is expected to continue to strengthen over the next couple of hours with 850 millibar flow out of the southeast that is currently reaching upwards of 30 miles per hour, which is definitely more modest, but it is definitely more organized low-level jet, and it definitely isn't broken up. This is expected to increase to potentially the mid to low 40 miles per hour around 7 p.m. That will definitely lead to an uptick in directional shear across this region, and it will definitely support the potential for a couple of tornadoes across this region. However, our storm mode will definitely be a little bit more of a limiting factor across this region, with more messy convection. That will definitely be more of a limiting factor to our tornado potential, but we will definitely have a pretty strong low-level jet that will still be able to support the potential of tornadoes nonetheless across this region. And further off to the east as well, or sorry, to the west, we will also have a little bit more of a spotty low-level jet, more of a weaker low-level jet that may be able to support some weak directional shear further off to the west, that may be able to support the potential of a isolated weak tornado, but definitely not going to see too much of a risk for tornado potential further off to the west, although it is possible. We will definitely see the best potential for tornadoes around the Houston metro region into western Louisiana. Taking a look at our 200 millibars and how that is expected to affect our risk for hail across this region with our speed shear, as well as our overall risk for severe thunderstorms in our lift with the spreading of our wind vectors. Starting off with the spreading of our wind vectors, we definitely have some pretty noticeable defluence across this region in the exit region of this 200 millibar jet, in our subtropical jet. We definitely have some pretty pretty notable defluence aloft that will definitely lead to a very large amount of lift across this region, and will support a likely more widespread convection across this region. But the enhanced lift will definitely be an aiding factor in our overall risk for severe thunderstorms. But as far as our speed shear goes with our 200 millibar jet, we are definitely expected to see some pretty strong 200 millibar flow. With 200 millibar flow that is expected to reach upwards of the mid to upper 90 knots across this region, potentially even reaching an isolated 100 knots across this region, will definitely support some pretty widespread and some pretty strong speed shear across this region, and will definitely be supportive of the potential for large hail and even potentially some significant hail in some regions. Taking a look at our storm relative felicity and how that is expected to affect our tornado risk across this region. As our low-level jet continues to strengthen, we will definitely see some pretty strong directional shear values across this region, some pretty large storm relative felicity values, potentially reaching upwards of 300, 200, and maybe even reaching 400 in some regions. Anywhere that you see upwards of 600 to even 1,000 is definitely contamination due to our convective allowing models, but we will definitely have some pretty large amounts of storm relative felicity values across this region. Definitely some strong directional shear that will be supportive of the potential of a couple of tornadoes that could be embedded with some of our messy storms. And further off to the west, where we do have the potential of an isolated tornado, we will definitely have some weaker storm relative felicity values, but it could definitely reach upwards of 200, maybe even an isolated 300 further off to the west. That will likely be as a result of some pretty strong vorticity values along that warm front. That will definitely lead to a lot of storm relative felicity values that could definitely support a tornado risk. But with wind to the south of our warm front that is pushing out of the south, that immediately shifts off to the west, to the north of our warm front, that will definitely support a lot of surface vorticity and be very supportive of the potential for tornadoes along that warm front. Taking a look at our bulk shear values and how that is expected to indicate and affect our hail risk across this region, we are expected to see some pretty large bulk shear values across this region, potentially reaching upwards 50 to potentially 60 knots, maybe even reaching the 70 knots in some region. Same with further off to the east, where we could see the potential of bulk shear values upwards of 80 to potentially 70 knots. That will definitely be very indicative and supportive of the potential for some scattered large hail. I'm honestly not really too sure what makes this hatched area stand out from the rest of the hail risk, but the SPC has highlighted the potential for some massive hailstones in this hatched area. Honestly, I'm not really too sure what makes this stand out from further off to the east. It is likely the instability that we will look at, with some higher instability values that will support stronger updrafts and overall a higher risk for large hail across this region. That's likely the reason that we have this hatched area, and we could still definitely see the potential of some massive hailstones in this hatched area, depending on our instability, which we will look at in the future. Taking a look at our composite reflectivity so we can go over some general radar analysis, and I may attempt our timing. Starting off with our general radar analysis, as of right now, our storms are currently ongoing. However, they are expected to be extremely messy across this region. We are definitely expected to see really messy storms that are expected to be a little bit more of a linear mode, aren't really going to be too discrete, with updrafts that are expected to fire to the south of where we see some higher precipitation, where we could see the potential of embedded tornado, with our precipitation being vented off to the northeast. However, with the orientation to our warm front kind of being parallel to our shear vectors, that will definitely support more messy convection across this region, which will definitely make it harder for storms to support the potential of tornadoes across this region. We could see the potential of a couple of renegade supercells that may develop ahead of our messy convection further down to the south, that may eventually merge with our messy convection. If those can develop and they can maintain a discrete mode, that will definitely support the greatest potential for tornadoes, but with our messy convection or messy mode, that will definitely make our overall risk for tornadoes a little bit more difficult, but with very, very widespread rainfall, as you can obviously tell here, that will definitely be very indicative and very supportive of the potential of some widespread and definitely significant flash flooding across this region. Many regions across the high-risk region are expected to see almost non-stop rainfall as a result of very, very widespread and very heavy rainfall for multiple hours at a time, only really stopping at around midnight to the very early morning of tomorrow. Further off to the west, though, where we could see the potential of a little bit more discrete development, we could definitely see some more discrete storms fire off, as we don't really have as much forcing across this region, which will support more scattered storms, more discrete storms. Plus, with our dry line, any storms that fire along the dry line, they could definitely start off as being more discrete, as our shear vectors will definitely be more perpendicular to our initiating boundary. However, our storms are expected to rapidly develop into more of an MCS-like feature and support overall more of a damaging wind risk. We did have a hash risk for damaging wind, I think, at some point. However, that was taken away because we don't really have too much of a linear mode that would support more of a risk for violent damaging wind gusts. But that was taken away because we do have a little bit more messy convection. But with how widespread our storms are expected to be, we could definitely see the potential of some very widespread damaging wind gusts. Taking a look at our dew points and how that is expected to affect our instability across this region, we are expected to see a very large amount of moisture across this region, with dew point values further off to the east that are expected to get upwards of at least the low 70s, which will already support very large amounts of instability across this region, but they could even potentially reach the upper 70s and mid 70s across this region, which will support immense amounts of instability across this region. We will definitely see very, very large amounts of instability that will definitely be more than sufficient to fuel the risk for severe thunderstorms across this region. Further off to the east, though, or to the west, we will see a little bit lower dew point values, but still definitely very large amounts of moisture, with dew point values that could potentially reach upwards of the mid 60s to even the low 70s across this region, which will support very large amounts of instability to fuel our severe thunderstorms. Taking a look at our temperatures across this region, how that is expected to affect our instability, we are expected to see very hot temperatures across this region, with temperatures that are expected to get upwards of the low to potentially the mid 80s across eastern Texas in the enhanced risk region, maybe even reaching the low 90s in some regions. That, on top of our very large amounts of moisture, will definitely support very large amounts of instability across this region. That will, again, be more than sufficient to fuel our risk for severe thunderstorms across this region. Further off to the east, or to the west, we are also expected to see some pretty large amounts of heat across this region, with temperatures that are expected to get upwards of the 80s, the mid 80s, further down to the south of our pseudo warm front, and potentially reaching the upper 60s and the mid 70s to the north of our pseudo warm front, or our differential heating boundary, or our boundary of warm air advection. That will still definitely support very large amounts of instability. I am definitely a little bit more concerned about what our temperature is going to look like further to the north of our pseudo warm front, with temperatures that are expected to be a little bit lower and may support overall less surface instability, but they are definitely pretty decent and will support some instability nonetheless, with the majority of our instability being further down to the south of our pseudo warm front. The reason that we don't really have widespread temperatures that are getting pretty high is likely due to the fact that our pseudo warm front really hasn't extended all the way up to the north yet. Taking a look at our lapse rates and how that is expected to affect our instability across this region, we are expected to see some pretty large amounts of lapse rates across the enhanced risk region ahead of our messy storms. Lapse rates that are expected to reach upwards of the low 8s as well as the mid to upper 7s, which will definitely be a massive aid in our instability instability across this region, as will lead to that increased temperature gradient in the vertical and increase the tendency for air to rise. It will also expand our layer for hail development, which will lead to an increased risk for hail across this region, as well as overall help with our overall storm organization and intensity of our updrafts. Our lapse rates definitely tend to help with quite a lot of stuff, so having our lapse rates there will definitely lead to an increased risk for storm potential, definitely aid in our overall risk for storms across this region. And further off to the west, we will also have some pretty decent lapse rates as well. Lapse rates that are expected to get upwards of the upper 8s, definitely expected to be a little bit higher, get a little bit higher further off to the west, which will definitely aid in our instability quite a lot, even amongst some lower dew point values. Taking a look at our 700 millibar temperatures and our convective inhibition and how that is expected to affect our instability and our overall risk for severe thunderstorms, we do have some pretty warm air advection out of the southwest here. At our 700 millibars, that is extremely warm, definitely leading to a really stout elevated mixed layer across this region, which has been overcome so far. However, constant elevated mixed layer advection will definitely lead to a significant increase in convective inhibition by the time the sun sets. So by the time the sun does set and we lose surface heating, storms will likely become elevated, as we do have a really strong warm advection out of the south at our 700 millibars. Which will likely lead to that elevated mixed layer choking off any storms that are currently remaining by the time the sun sets, even amongst immense amounts of instability with the immense amounts of moisture that we have across this region. Our elevated mixed layer will definitely begin to slowly choke off our storms by the time the sun does set. It will definitely be a slower process because we have very large amounts of instability, and the cap may not be put fully back in place due to that instability. However, by the time the sun does set, we will definitely have to watch to see how our storms will become elevated, but it doesn't really look like our convective inhibition will really affect our storms too much. Taking a look at our instability and how that is expected to fuel our severe thunderstorms across this region, starting off with the enhanced risk region, we are expected to see very large amounts of instability across this region, with K values that are expected to get upwards of the 3,000s and potentially even the low to mid 4,000s further off to the west in the enhanced risk region. We may see lower Cape values that may be lingering more around the 2,000s further off to the east. However, this will still definitely be more than sufficient to fuel the potential of severe thunderstorms across this region, including widespread severe thunderstorms and the potential for our various hazards, including the potential for some widespread damaging wind gusts, the potential for some large hail, and the potential for a couple of tornadoes across this region. Further off to the west, where we could see the potential of more discrete storms, more isolated storms, as well as the potential of some significant hail, we will definitely see very large amounts of instability and potentially higher instability values compared to in the enhanced risk region. And these higher instability values will likely lead to potentially more of an increased risk for massive hailstones across this region, the increased risk for hail. That's likely the cause for the slight risk hashed region for hail across this region. But even with very large amounts of speed shear across this entire region, very large amounts of instability, I'm surprised we don't have a much larger hash risk region, including the enhanced risk region, for the potential of some massive hailstones. I'm honestly not really too sure why the SPC is singling out this region for the potential of massive hailstones, but regardless, our instability will definitely be more than sufficient to fuel the potential of some very large hailstones, the potential for some scattered large hail. Taking a look at our surface-based cape and how that is expected to fuel our surface-based storms across this region, and how that's going to impact our tornado risk, we are expected to see very large amounts of surface-based cape across this region, with surface-based cape that is expected to translate down from our most unstable, so we shouldn't really see our surface-based cape really waver too much from our most unstable, and this surface-based cape is definitely expected to be pretty strong by the time the sun sets as well, with the very large amounts of instability and moisture that we have across this region. That will continue to support very large amounts of surface-based cape even after the sun sets. That will continue to support surface-based storms as storms move into more coastal regions in Texas. So regardless, we will still see surface-based storms even amongst very large amounts of warm air advection aloft in a really strong elevated mixed layer. That very large amount of moisture will support continuous amounts of instability and very large amounts of instability across this region. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability and how that's going to aid in the overall risk for severe thunderstorms and aid in fueling our severe thunderstorms, we are expected to see some pretty decent 0 to 3 kilometer instability values that are definitely going to be pretty moderate to potentially even strong in some regions, with 0 to 3 kilometer instability values that are expected to reach 150 to potentially even approaching 200 in some regions. That will definitely be a massive aid in fueling our severe thunderstorms across this region and fueling surface-based storms. Same with further off to the west, where we won't have as much 0 to 3 kilometer instability, but we will definitely have a pool of some pretty decent 0 to 3 kilometer instability across this region that will definitely aid in fueling our severe thunderstorms. Taking a look at our energy helicity index values and how that is expected to indicate the potential for tornadoes across this region, we are expected to see really decent energy helicity index values across this region. Energy helicity index values that are expected to reach upwards of 5 to potentially 4 across this region. Maybe an isolated 5 to 4 is possible, but more widespread, we are expected to see mainly 3, 2, and 1, which is definitely in line with the upper end 5% tornado risk across this region. I do think that they had the possibility of issuing a 10% tornado risk, including the possibility of significant tornadoes across this region. However, our storm mode and our messy convection will definitely make it significantly more conditional. However, with our very decent storm relative helicity values across this region, reaching upwards of 300 to even an isolated 400 in some region, and some really strong instability values across this region, I definitely think a conditional significant tornado is definitely not out of the question, but our storm mode will definitely not be able to reach upwards of a 10% tornado risk. But we could definitely see the potential of a couple tornadoes across this region, and I definitely think the possibility of a significant tornado is possible. Taking a look at our wind gust models and how that is expected to indicate the potential for damaging wind gusts across this region, you can see already with our storm mode that we are expected to see a very large swath of some pretty decently strong damaging wind gusts across this region that aren't necessarily expected to be significant, but definitely really widespread, with damaging wind gusts that are expected to get upwards of 50 to potentially 40 miles per hour in some regions, with more widespread 40 to 30 miles per hour across this region. Definitely in a very widespread region, definitely expected to see some pretty widespread damaging wind gusts that will definitely blow around loose unsecured objects and potentially even do damage to property across this region, and that will definitely be more of a result of our storm mode across this region, even if it is going to be a little bit more messier. And I did say that our storm mode may be a little bit more limiting to our damaging wind gust risk across this region. That's only if our storms are more of a MCS propagating eastward type of fashion thing. But if we have a line of severe thunderstorms that progresses further down to the south, progresses southward, that will definitely support more of a risk for damaging wind gusts. But if we just have a cluster of storms with updrafts that kind of just move in a train off to the east, that won't really support as much of a risk for damaging wind gusts. But if we can see southward moving linear system across this region, that will definitely be more supportive of the potential for damaging wind gusts across this region. Taking a look at our mesoanalysis page for our hail risk across this region, you can already tell that we have a very large overlap of our ingredients for large hail across this region, with a very broad 32 on our large hail parameter that extends across the coast into the majority of the Gulf of Mexico there. Majority of it is in the Gulf of Mexico, but we definitely have some pretty decently high large hail parameter values across this region that are definitely indicative of the potential for large hail across this region. Same with further off to the west as well, with a little bit more of a discrete cell there, but definitely indicating an overlap of our ingredients for large hail, with a 28 on our large hail parameter, indicating the potential for some large hail there. For our significant hail parameter, we definitely have some lower significant hail parameter values across this region, but we do have two there, and even isolated 3 in some regions. That is indicating the potential for some significant hail, even if it isn't the highest risk for significant hail. For our SARS hail size, definitely indicating upwards of 3 inches being possible in regions where we could see the potential of some significant hail. And I definitely think maybe greater than 2 inches is possible for the enhanced risk region, as we will definitely have some pretty high bulk shear values backing our storms, and some really high instability values that will support some really strong updrafts. And I definitely think the potential for upwards of 2 inches and maybe even greater is possible for the enhanced risk region. And then for our significant hail percentage, we have upwards of 90% and even 100% in some regions across the vast majority of this region for Central Texas, and even in the enhanced risk region. In the enhanced risk region, we have upwards of 100%, definitely indicating the potential for some significant hail being possible. Taking a look at our total precipitation, how that is expected to indicate our risk for flash flooding across this region, we are expected to see very, very large amounts of rainfall across this region, which is the reason why we have a high risk for flash flooding to begin with, and we already have multiple flash flood warnings and flood warnings for a ton of rivers and tributary rivers across this region, with very large amounts of precipitation that are expected to reach totals upwards of 5 to potentially 6 inches across this region, maybe even approaching 7 inches in some regions, which is going to be absolutely insane. In any low-lying areas, especially near any running water, such as creeks or rivers, we'll definitely see very large amounts of swelling due to runoff from this precipitation, and that is a result of our storm mode and our messy convection and very widespread rainfall and heavy rainfall for very large extended periods of time across this region. Again, that will definitely support very large amounts of rainfall and the potential for widespread flash flooding is expected, and it is expected to be significant in some regions. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator, and join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. If you live in any of the areas I covered for today, please stay weather alert for the time being. If you notice anything might have been wrong in this forecast, or would like to make a suggestion or ask a question, please leave a comment. 3 other channels I highly suggest you check out are One Nation Weather, Weather Watcher, and JaxonWX. The links to their channels will be in the description, and hopefully I'll be able to see you guys tomorrow with another forecast.